Welcome to our deep dive into the source material. If you are prepping for a weekend of pure, unadulterated motorsport, trying to catch up on the off-season news, or you are looking to understand the complex engineering feats and massive failures of the new regulations, you are in the perfect place.
Absolutely.
Because today is your ultimate shortcut. We are looking at what is shaping up to be a highly anticipated, completely chaotic dawn of a massive new era in motorsport. We are synthesizing technical briefings, historical data, and some honestly shocking preseason testing reports surrounding the 2026 Formula One season opener, the Qatar Airways Australian Grand Prix at Albert Park. And just a quick note before we tear into this segment is part of our news coverage of recent F1 events.
And it's really difficult to overstate the magnitude of this weekend. We aren't just turning the page to a new calendar year here. The entire rule book has been ripped up and completely rewritten. These new regulations are throwing the established order straight out the window. And in the process, they are turning a beloved historic track into a potential nightmare for the world's greatest automotive engineers. The entire grid is stepping into the great unknown right now, and some major teams are already showing serious structural cracks before the lights even go out.
So let's ground ourselves at Albert Park to start, because for those who might need a quick refresher on the venue, you have to remember this is not a pristine, purpose-built racing facility.
No, not at all.
It is a semi-permanent public park circuit in Melbourne. You have 14 turns across 58 laps of racing. But because it's a public road for most of the year, the asphalt has incredibly low grip. It's dirty, it's coated in oil from daily commuter traffic, and there is, barely any rubber down when the practice sessions start on Friday.
Right, Pirelli actually rates the track evolution here as a 4 out of 5, which means the grip levels changed drastically from Friday practice to Sunday's race. Furthermore, they rate the baseline asphalt grip itself as a dismal 2 out of 5. That is a uniquely hostile environment for a brand new, highly complex car making its competitive debut.
And the history here is incredibly rich. Looking at the historical data, Lewis Hamilton has an astounding 8 pole positions at Albert Park, while Michael Schumacher holds the record for the most wins with 4. But it is fascinating to see that modern legends like Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso, they only have 1 win each at this circuit.
It's a tricky track to master.
It really is. And Charles Leclerc currently holds the lap record with a 1.19.813. But given the sweeping 2026 regulation upheaval, I have to imagine that lap time is entirely out of reach this weekend.
Oh, it is practically untouchable right now. The 2026 cars are fundamentally different beasts, and they are inherently slower at this stage of their development.
Okay, let's unpack this for a moment. We are now looking at cars powered by a 50% electric, 50% thermal engine split. The aerodynamic rules have also been completely overhauled.
The aero changes are massive.
Huge. The traditional DRS zones are completely gone this year, replaced entirely by active aero, which allows both the front and rear wings to open up to reduce drag on the straights. And drivers now have a manual overtake mode they can deploy, as long as they pass a detection point within 1 second of the car ahead.
What's fascinating here is the massive, glaring flaw that these new engine regulations have exposed, specifically at the Australian Grand Prix. With that 50-50 power split, the cars rely heavily on the MGU-K unit.
Right.
When the driver hits the brakes, the MGU-K reverses its polarity, turning from electric motor into a generator to harvest kinetic energy. You need to be aggressively on the brakes to harvest the power required to feed that massive electrical half of the engine.
But looking at the telemetry from Brembo, the official brake supplier, Australia, poses a critical problem. Out of the entire racing calendar, drivers spend the least amount of time on the brakes here. They only spend 8.5 seconds braking per lap.
Exactly. Just 11% of the entire lap is spent on the brakes. For comparison, a fast-flowing track like Qatar requires 9 seconds of braking, and Monza requires roughly 9.25 seconds. Australia is the absolute basement for energy recovery.
So the obvious question is, what happens to a car that requires heavy braking to charge its battery when it races on a track that literally doesn't have enough braking zones?
You get a crisis called energy starving. Because the drivers aren't on the brakes long enough to naturally recharge the battery, the cars will simply run out of electrical juice. If you lose 50% of your power on a main straight, you become a sitting duck.
A sitting duck.
Totally defenseless. To avoid this, drivers are going to have to drive incredibly unnaturally. We will see them aggressively downshifting, violently using the gearbox to force the engine to regenerate power.
Which is incredibly ironic, considering Albert Park used to feature tight chicanes that demanded heavy braking. But the organizers removed them a few years ago to make the track faster and more flowing for the fans. By smoothing out the circuit to increase the spectacle, they accidentally compounded a very modern engineering problem. Turn 9, for instance, barely requires a touch of the brakes now. It is going to be a high-speed juggling act just to keep the battery alive.
It is a delicate balance. And as we look at the teams arriving in Melbourne, it is clear that some have absolutely failed to strike that balance. The chaos level across the grid is off the charts. We are seeing absolute disasters, dramatic debuts, and the arrival of a highly anticipated 11th team.
Let's start with the disaster, because the situation over at Aston Martin is shocking. On paper, this is the dream team. They have Fernando Alonso in the car, they brought in the unparalleled designer Adrian Newey, and they are operating out of a brand new state-of-the-art facility. Yet, the preseason testing reports suggest they are in absolute crisis mode.
The technical failure stems directly from their new engine partnership. They switched to Honda power units for 2026, and those engines are currently producing excessive, violent harmonic vibrations.
Vibrations that are literally breaking the car.
Yes. The frequency of these vibrations is so severe that it is literally shattering the car's batteries. The housing area is shaking itself to pieces. And because the vibrations are coming from multiple interacting components within the chassis and the power unit, there isn't one simple aerodynamic or mechanical fix. Honda stated they want the car in a competitive state before Suzuka, but right now they're struggling just to keep the car intact.
The rumor mill in the Italian press, which some of our sources are backing up, claims that Aston Martin might only run the bare minimum number of laps required in qualifying to satisfy the 107% rule, meaning they just want to set a time within 107% of the pole sitter to legally qualify for the race. And then, on Sunday, they might intentionally retire the cars after a few laps.
To simply pack up the garage and go home? From an engineering perspective, it is a desperate form of disaster mitigation.
But wait, think about how absurd that is. You have a billion-dollar facility, astronomical salaries paying for Alonso and Newey, and your master plan for Sunday is to purposefully park the car to avoid vibrating it into dust.
It highlights the extreme danger of rushing massive operational expansions. When you bring in demanding technical minds, switch to a new engine manufacturer, and try to run a completely new factory all at once, you invite the perfect storm for a systemic failure. The correlation between all those new departments clearly isn't there yet.
Aston Martin isn't the only team suffering, though. Let's pivot to Williams. They have built an incredibly heavy, strikingly basic car. Team principal James Vowles has been brutally honest with the media, admitting it might take 6 months just to fix the current foundational weight problems, and up to 4 years for them to actually become a winning team.
Which places a massive, unfair burden on their drivers, particularly Alex Albon, who's been fiercely loyal to that project.
The statistics around Albon's career are heartbreaking in this context. In his 4 full years driving for Williams from 2022 through to the end of 2025, he scored a total of 116 points. If you compare that to his single 2020 season driving for Red Bull, where he scored 105 points in 1 year, the stark reality sets in. In 4 whole years at Williams, he has only scored 11 points more than he did in 1 year in a top car.
And now he is joined by Carlos Sainz, a driver accustomed to fighting for wins at Ferrari. Sainz is bringing his elite expertise to a car that, frankly, cannot utilize it yet.
Though Sainz is apparently an incredible asset behind the scenes for this rebuild. There was a fantastic quote from rookie Ollie Bierman recently. Bierman was absolutely amazed by Sainz's precise, granular technical feedback during debriefs. Bierman noted that while he feels the same behavioral issues in the car, he lacks the technical vocabulary and the sheer detail to explain the car's mechanics the way Sainz does to the engineers.
That kind of diagnostic feedback is exactly why James Vowles wanted Sainz. Even if the car is heavy and slow right now, Sainz can articulate exactly which aerodynamic surfaces or suspension components are failing them.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Despite the struggles of established teams like Williams and Aston Martin, we finally have an 11th team on the grid. Welcome to Formula One, Cadillac. They are running the MAC-01 chassis, which stands for Mario Andretti Cadillac, a beautiful tribute to motorsport royalty.
It has been a long time coming. Naturally, Cadillac is experiencing massive youthful struggles. They had missing parts during preseason testing and struggled heavily with data correlation. But the ultimate irony here is that despite those rookie growing pains, Cadillac will likely beat the mighty Aston Martin this weekend simply by managing to finish the race without the car breaking down.
Just crossing the finish line will be a victory for them. Checo Perez released a great statement about how honored he feels to make history with a brand new team. And alongside him, they have Valtteri Bottas, who is bringing his own unique baggage to this new era.
Yes, Bottas is starting the 2026 season with a 5-place grid penalty.
It carried over all the way from the Abu Dhabi race at the end of 2024 because he crashed into Kevin Magnussen, which prompted Magnussen to sarcastically key his radio and deliver the now iconic line, "Isn't it fucking lovely?"
Classic Magnussen.
Exactly. But Cadillac isn't the only new name. We also have Audi fully taking over the Sauber team, making them the first completely new engine manufacturer to enter the sport since Honda in 2015.
And their testing data is surprisingly optimistic. They ran almost 3 times as many test laps as Aston Martin and actually outlapped Red Bull and Ferrari in terms of sheer distance. The reliability's there, however, they are suffering from one major, glaring struggle: massive turbo lag.
Which, under the new 50/50 regulations, is much more than just a slight delay in acceleration, right?
Precisely. Because the new engines rely on the electric battery for half their power, if a large turbo takes too long to spool up and provide thermal power off the starting line, the electric motor drains itself rapidly trying to compensate. The battery depletes instantly, leaving the car essentially dead in the water. They were visibly one of the worst cars off the line in simulation runs. If Audi cannot map that power delivery through a software fix before Sunday, they are going to get swallowed up by the pack going into turn 1.
Swallowed whole. Which is a perfect contrast to the team sitting at the very front of the grid right now. Let's look at how Ferrari engineered their way around that exact turbo problem. Ferrari left preseason testing with the fastest lap times and brilliant reliability.
Their approach is the exact opposite of Audi's. Ferrari made a highly strategic choice to build a very small turbo. Now, a small turbo lacks the absolute peak thermal power of a larger one on a long straight, but it spools up incredibly fast. Team principal Fred Vasseur prioritized drivability, and race starts over pure, raw horsepower.
But wait, if Ferrari prioritized a smaller turbo for drivability off the line, aren't they just going to get hunted down on those long DRS straights by cars with higher top speeds?
That is the calculated risk. Vasseur believes that track position and avoiding that initial battery drain off the line is more valuable than top speed. Ferrari even instituted a new starting procedure to manage this. A blue light flashes for 5 seconds on the steering dash before the standard start sequence, perfectly syncing the driver's throttle application with the electric deployment. It is hyper-optimized for the launch.
And it seems to be paying off. Off the track, Charles Leclerc is having quite the year already, secretly marrying Alexander Somblu in a completely private ceremony in Monaco, driving away in a breathtakingly rare 1957 Ferrari 250 Testarossa. Unmatched style. But as fast as Ferrari looks over a single lap, I am hearing whispers that Mercedes might actually be the true favorite for the race distance.
In this new 2026 era, it's not just about sprint speed, it's about marathon efficiency. Mercedes excels at energy management. In those long race simulations, their car looked incredibly stable, rarely suffering from the battery depletion plaguing the rest of the paddock. Furthermore, they're benefiting from some intense, behind-the-scenes political drama regarding engine compression ratios.
I saw some headlines about this, but the technical details were dense. Can you break down the controversy?
The new regulations cap engine compression ratios at 11.6, and that ratio is measured while the intake air is tested at 130 degrees Celsius.
Which is incredibly hot for intake air. If I remember my basic mechanics right, running high compression with air that hot is a massive recipe for engine knocking or pre-ignition.
Precisely. But high compression is also how you extract maximum fuel efficiency from the thermal engine. The paddock unanimously voted to implement a new, stricter test to ensure Kings weren't exceeding that 11.6 ratio, but that test doesn't legally go into effect until June 1st. Toto Wolff basically revealed that Mercedes had the backing of the FIA president, Mohammed bin Sulayem, throughout this regulatory process. Now, keeping in mind we were just looking at the source material here impartially, the implications are huge.
So the implication is that Mercedes engineered their engine to easily pass these new strict tests even at 130 degrees, while rival teams might be relying on measurement loopholes that will be abruptly closed in June.
Exactly. Mercedes is playing the long game. They are starting the era from a position of immense structural legality and efficiency.
That is fascinating. So Ferrari has the sprint speed, Mercedes has the marathon efficiency and the political high ground. What about Red Bull?
There is a lot of tension at Red Bull. The car looks solid, but they are navigating this new era without their legendary advisor, Helmut Marko. The bigger issue is the atmosphere surrounding their star driver. Max Verstappen has been remarkably blunt. publicly threatening to quit Formula One at the end of his current contract if he doesn't enjoy driving these new 2026 cars. He stated clearly that he is at the end of his career, and if the cars are too heavy or rely too much on lifting and coasting, he is out.
Having your lead driver mentally checking out before the first race puts immense pressure on the team. But while Max is threatening retirement, the Red Bull sister team, Racing Bulls, is going in the exact opposite direction. They brought in rookie ARVID LINDBLAD. He is just 18 years old, born in August 2007. They fast-tracked him into the seat after he won the Formula 4 race in Macau. He is immense talent, but putting a teenager into the most complex F1 cars ever built while your veteran world champion is complaining about how difficult they are to drive is a massive gamble.
It will absolutely be a trial by fire for LINDBLAD. But speaking of teams facing harsh realities, we need to talk about McLaren.
Yes. Let's look at the team that should be riding high right now. McLaren absolutely steamrolled the 2025 Constructors' Championship. They clinched the title in Singapore with 6 full races left on the calendar. But looking at the preseason data, they appear to be the biggest losers of this regulation change. They could potentially drop down to the 4th fastest team on the grid, trailing Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. How does a team with that much momentum drop the ball so hard?
It points to a massive issue with data correlation. Specifically, it seems their wind tunnel data did not match the real-world aerodynamic loads generated by the new active aero systems. When the front and rear wings open simultaneously to shed drag, it dramatically shifts the aerodynamic center of pressure on the car. If the floor of the car isn't designed to handle that sudden shift, the car becomes violently unstable at high speeds. To go from wrapping up a championship a month early to fighting for the bottom of the podium is a bitter pill, but it shows how a completely new rulebook resets everything. Your past success buys you nothing.
Before we wrap up the grid, we have to mention Haas, who are looking like the dark horse surprise of the season. The car looks incredibly reliable. But their driver, Ollie Bierman, is sitting on a knife's edge. He has accumulated 10 penalty points on his super license. He is just one minor track limits infraction or clumsy bump away from an automatic race ban.
A single, ignored yellow flag, and he will be forced to sit out the next race. The psychological pressure on him this weekend will be immense.
And finally, a quick note on Alpine. They debuted a totally unique DRS system. Instead of the flap hinging upward like every other team on the grid, their rear wing physically collapses backward to shed drag. It is so radical that their own technical director, Steve Nielsen, admitted he is feeling nervous about being the only team to interpret the rules that way.
It is highly innovative. But in Formula One, when you are the only team doing something, you are either a genius who has found a half-second advantage, or you have made a terrible season-ruining mistake.
We will find out soon enough. So, what does this all mean for you listening? We have gone through the rules, the crises, the rookies, and the frontrunners. But as you prepare to watch the race on Sunday, remember that absolutely no one in the paddock truly knows what will happen when the red lights go out.
It is the ultimate unknown. Pirelli is supplying unknown tire variables. The public park track offers almost no grip. And unfortunately for teams like Aston Martin hoping for a chaotic equalizer, there is no rain expected in Melbourne to mask the car's deficiencies.
It is going to be a pure, unadulterated test of survival and strategy. Which driver can manage their battery without losing track position? Which car won't shake itself apart? Who can navigate the low grip without ending up in the wall?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves us with a fascinating, almost existential question for the sport moving forward. We discussed the severe lack of braking zones at Albert Park, causing energy starvation in these new hybrid engines. If cars are running out of power simply because modern flowing tracks don't allow for enough heavy braking, what happens next?
Do they change the engineering of the cars, or do they physically change the historic tracks?
Exactly. Will the FIA be forced to permanently alter historic circuits? Will we see them bringing back those old clunky chicanes here in Australia just to force the drivers to brake? Or will they have to artificially manipulate the energy deployment rules mid-season just to keep this new era of Formula One cars functional? It is a massive philosophical battle between track design and automotive engineering.
It really is. Something has to give, and we are going to see the very first cracks this weekend. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope you feel prepped, primed, and ready for the 2026 season. Keep a close eye on how these absolute engineering marvels and potential disasters unfold on the asphalt. And don't forget to follow DRS Zone on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube for all our continued coverage. We will catch you next time.